but it doesn't have to be an or statement. It can be an and. Like they can beat us out with budget and we can still win where it matters.
Own it. I love it. Hello. Welcome back to Tea Time with Tech Marketing Leaders. It is 2025, y'all. Are you ready? Are you buckled up? Are you like rip roared, ready to go? Or are you more of like taking a back seat and leaning in and just like enjoying the ride? I'm so curious. I am so excited to kick off this episode. This was a happy accident because somebody else was supposed to be here, and I'm very sad that they aren't, but don't worry, they will be back in February. But I had this opening and I had just had this wonderful, wonderful, wonderful conversation with a lovely Kelsey Purcell. And it was just like this coffee chat. And I was like, oh, no. I need to have her on the show. And so I called up Kelsey. I was like, hey, what do you do Thursday? Want to come hang out? And she was like, yeah, let's do it. So here we are, folks. Here we are. I'm so excited because we are going to probably tangent left, right, center, but I always bring us back to center because the conversation we're going to have today is going to get super meta as we talk about the importance of making hard conversation conversational. I did it. I wasn't sure to roll off the tongue. It did.
Yes.
Yes. Hard conversations conversational. We're going to dig into that. But first, we have to know about Kelsey because you don't know her like I know her, and I want you to know her like I know her. She is wonderful. Kelsey has 10 plus years of digital marketing experience as a data-driven, problem-solving marketer who is committed to always figuring it out and constantly evolving with the digital world, wearing the necessary hats and remaining chill and easygoing on the way. She's awesome. And while she knows what she's doing, she's also super chill about it. Kelsey, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy. I love happy accidents. I'm a big like Bob Ross. How do we just incorporate that in? So I'm happy to be here.
I'm clearly very excited to have you. I was tripping over my own words because I just want to get to the root of all the things we're going to talk about. So let's kick off with your story. You know, whether marketing found us or we found marketing, it's always a joy to hear how you got into it. So where are you now and how did you get there?
Okay, so now I am literally living in my dream location in the Outer Banks, North Carolina. And it's because like I'm able to do this because of what I do. So I work remotely. I'm at my second cybersecurity startup and I love it. I feel like I've really found like my home as far as who I like to work with, the environment, all of the things. But I have to laugh because when we were having our coffee date, you were like, you know, it's not like a doctor or whatever. You don't dream of being a marketer when you're like growing up. But I was thinking back and I really started when I was in high school. So maybe I didn't get into the classes in high school, but I was taking business classes. I was doing like the marketing thing. And you could do a like early release program if you had a job. So I originally thought that I wanted to be in like the therapist world. And then I did business marketing and I was like, oh no, I want to be in marketing. I'm really good at it. I really enjoy it. And so I went into college like I'm going to have a marketing degree. I got my degree in marketing. I worked in college, like doing advertising and marketing. And then from my first job, I have been in marketing. So maybe I'm not the typical marketer. I don't think I dreamed of it when I was little. I actually, full disclosure, wanted to be like a pilot, like a jet pilot. But yeah, since, you know, things got real-ish, I've been in the marketing world and leaning into it. So
oh my gosh,
that's how it all started.
High school. You learned about you.
Yeah.
You've had a
high school
edge in the game.
I was in like yeah. I was like full marketing nerd starting high school, like junior year of high school, and just kept riding that wave. I'm still on it, so I don't see it stopping anytime soon.
It's so interesting because usually when you like find something usually when you find something you like or love doing, like I went to when I found photography in high school, decided I wanted to go to college for it. But then college sort of beat the creativity out of me and ruined it. And so when I left,
Yep.
my uncle who helped me get my first media planning job was like, "I'm sending you to New York simply because you're going to be a photographer and not a media planner forever." And I was like, "Yes, exactly, Uncle Sean, totally." And then I found spreadsheets and the rest is history. But it was like, uh, so for somebody to actually fall in love with it and be able to stick with it is just so unheard of. And I just love that. I'm a little jealous that I wasn't able to like stick to the thing. But what's your thoughts on like, what marketing meant to you as a high schooler versus like where you are today? Has it drastically changed, or is it somewhat just like the same of what it's always been, but you just know more?
No. I think like there are foundations that are the same, right? But I truly think like in high school things aren't totally hard because you don't have a lot, but high school is like a weird awkward time and I was good at it. Like it just tapped into my strengths and I had great teachers and then the strengths just kind of continued and it came really naturally to me and I enjoyed it, right? I didn't I don't know. This sounds weird, but I didn't like there are things that I was good at, but I didn't really enjoy them. Like they didn't fill my cup. But marketing did. And when I was in college, I had multiple professors who were like, no, come be a finance major. No, come be a CIS major. And especially on the CIS world, which is ironic now because I'm in the cybersecurity, realm, they were like, we have no women in our program. Please come be in the program. But I think marketing just leans into my strengths and I can feel that like individual fulfillment while also doing my job. But most of what I've learned besides like random tidbits that I'll pull on, it's just from experience and meeting people and learning from them and asking questions and soundboarding. Like that's all really, really important. And marketing changes every day. I mean, think about even 5 years ago, there's an element of influencer marketing and social and video and all of the things that wasn't even a consideration when I think when I was in school, Instagram was just starting and I'm dating myself now, but we used to like post very filtered pictures of our
That's how
food.
Instagram got
So,
started.
just to give people an idea of, of where it was and where it's come
No
in the
way.
last 10 plus
I mean,
years.
that's how everybody got started on Instagram. You got to post what you're eating.
Yes. And like so silly, but
Right?
so little pressure, right? It was just like, oh, here we are, not curated. This is just what I'm doing. Here's my spaghetti.
It's so true. So, in terms of like understanding, even back then, what your sort of superpowers and strengths were, what were they then? It sounds like they're the same now, but how have they evolved since?
Yeah. So I'm a big problem solver, sometimes to a fault. And I think this like analytical thinking of okay, how do we figure this out? But the creativity that comes with marketing of how do we do this in a way that's notable and not just like a snooze fest and not something that, you can point to the on the street or in our case like on LinkedIn or digital and see it happening 10, 15 times. So how do we achieve and like solve this problem that we're facing? And that's kind of ever evolving, right? Like my boss and I talk all of the time where marketing doesn't have this end game. It's just consistent and constant and it's always flowing and you're always figuring out like, okay, what's the next challenge? What are we going to do next? What's our next like creative thing? Even if you do the most amazing marketing thing, you've now set the standard for yourself. So
Always got
what's
to
next?
up the challenge, up the
And
bar. Yep.
Yeah. So I think that like problem solving capability and then like the creative element of how can I tap into my creativity and also have this like data driven analysis part of myself, because I told you, like, I was really good at technical things. I'm
Mhm.
really good at math. I'm like those elements, but I'm also creative and I really like writing and I like that element as well. So it just kind of married the two. And then the evolution is how I learn and listen from other people because I'm so excitable and I'm like my ADD is coming out where I'm just like so jumping at the bit, so excited, ready to do something. And listening to people and taking it in and like taking a step back to think through what we're doing and how it can be meaningful instead of like jumping one to the other is really been something that's happened like the last few years that I have enjoyed, which previously like could have been a challenge for me, but could have been
Yeah.
tapped into as like a strength, right? If you're in those environments where you have multiple clients or you have like so many things going on that you need to constantly like be kind of jumping in and like making yourself known. Now I've kind of taken a little bit of like, okay, what do I want to hear from other people and how will that help me have better ideas? And having that like combination
Giving
of
our game away,
conversation.
Kelsey. You're jumping ahead. I'm going to hold you back a little bit. We're not quite there yet, but I do
I
think
know.
this is what's so wonderful about your superpower. And I have the same sort of aha moment in terms of how I've figured out later in life how I learn, and how I learn is also like the power of podcasts was so eye opening for me simply because I am an auditory learner, and I learn so much faster and
Interesting.
better through listening versus reading. And so that has just been, which is why I love podcasting, because as a host, you just do a whole lot. I probably should do less talking and do more listening, but generally, you're supposed to do a whole lot of listening. And I have to say, podcasting for the last 5 years has been like the best school ever because of that, of where of like, what questions and curiosities do I have? And getting to sit across the table from amazing smart people like you, I get to ask them and listen and find the trends and absorb. And so, yeah, I agree. Learning how we learn and then being able to really lean into that has been such a gift of later years. Man, I wish I had that when I was younger.
Dude, I was just thinking that. I was like, wow, because the types of learners was discussed, right? Like that was something I don't remember which class, if it was like, I don't know, whatever. And you think, okay, so you could decide what type of learner people are and like you could distinguish that. But there
Hmm.
wasn't an offering for them. It wasn't like, oh, instead of reading 100 pages of this book, you can go listen to it or listen to a summary or listen to somebody explain it. It was, hey, uh, we know that you're an auditory learner.
Still got to read
Still
it.
got to read the textbook.
And let
See you in
me
class
quiz
Monday.
you about what color hat the girl was wearing, or let me ask you why they dropped their keys and didn't want to go home. I have no idea what you're talking.
Yeah. And I on that element though, and I'll say this because it was a realization for myself, not just like professionally, but talking to different people and how they learn is I can see visuals in my mind. Like I can
Mhm.
see how things are laid out. It is very, very clear to me from a marketing perspective what the funnel looks like and what different paths people are taking and all of the elements that are pulling together. And I've had to learn how other people learn and think
Mhm.
to make that accessible to them and vice versa, right? Like I kind of look at people, I'm like, okay, tell me what you're thinking, and then we can pull it out to see what we need to do together. So it's like, how am I learning? How do I see things? What makes me brilliant, but also what makes them brilliant too? And how do we like bring that together so
Yes.
everybody can see the brilliance and
Yes.
we
I
can
think it's
duplicate
so
it?
important, like whenever you're presenting information. I mean, I think that's what makes us great marketers and to the superpowers you're talking about is the ability to meet people where they are and present information in a way that we know is going to resonate with them because of how they process information, and that we are not all the same. Like, I know when I walk into a meeting with my business partner, who's a very different learner than I am, he is a reader, a voracious reader. That dude reads like 3 or 4 books a month. And so I know that if I can write my thoughts down really intentionally and get that to him ahead of time, then we could have a really great conversation because he's had a moment to absorb what I said versus auditory, where it takes him a lot longer to process what I'm saying versus reading it. So, yes, to like me being an auditory learner, but not expecting everybody else to be, and needing to make sure that we're meeting people where they are, which I think is what makes marketing even so much harder these days because we have to do so
Yeah,
much more.
because you don't know. We can't ask our audience, like, so how do you learn best? So, like, what reaches you in a great way? And if you have 100 different people, you could have like 100 different nuances of how they prefer to be spoken to, which is essentially what we're trying to do with marketing, is just speak to who we think will be interested in what we're trying to say. But how are we speaking to them? Is it like a visual? Is it a
All of the above.
podcast? Is it a email? Is it like a LinkedIn post? Is
Mm-hmm.
it they want to come to us and they want to make like the first move? All of these assumptions that we have to make, and then like iterations, we're really learning constantly, which is what I think like why we when you asked about like how's marketing change, well, we're constantly learning about what types of channels and like how we can communicate to them. And I think people are also learning how they prefer to be communicated to, especially if we think about like the people in our target audiences that are in their 50s, 60s, and so forth. Well, a lot of this stuff wasn't available to them, but maybe it's their preference now. Maybe they didn't know that this is what they
I
preferred.
know.
Who knows? We kind of do sometimes, and then
Well, let
maybe
me
it
ask you
changes
this.
tomorrow.
We're going to tangent here for a hot second, folks, but I think it'll be helpful for later. In the world now that we live of needing to be able to speak to so many different people in so many different ways, right? It's taking our marketing and sort of uh, breaking it apart into so many tiny pieces. It's becoming I'm going to speak for myself. It feels overwhelming and a bit unmanageable. Like, I have a client who's a coach, and we're talking about like all the different places he could be, right? He could be on Instagram. He could be on LinkedIn. He could be on YouTube. He could be. It's like, we don't have the kind of resources that is needed to be everywhere all the time for everyone. So I know that you need to be on LinkedIn, and
Mhm.
it would be fun because we have video to also be on YouTube and Instagram because we can sort of systematize that. But otherwise, like, this is where we need to lean
Yeah.
into. So how are you approaching your marketing in a way that doesn't feel like you have to be everywhere at once, trying to meet your audience all the time, everywhere?
Such a good question for startup world as well, because we are building the foundation that you then build on. And so we don't have this like, oh, we've been doing the traditional marketing for 10 years. Now, like, let's do something new. Let's expand. And we have this great team. I always tell people, and if you've worked with me before, you've probably heard this. If you try to be everything to everyone, you end
Yeah.
up like doing nothing. And it kind of feels like really unfulfilling too, because as the person executing, you're like, I'm doing all of this stuff. I'm everywhere. I'm like putting everything everywhere. And then you don't feel like you're seeing the fruits of your labor. So you're doing a lot and not getting a lot done. So when I'm talking about what the goals are and what we want to achieve, what we've tried already, and where we want to go from there, that's when I decide, okay, where does it make the most sense to absolutely, we have to check the box, right? Like, there are some things that you you have to check the box. It's easy to do. And then you can kind of say, all right, and then
Mhm.
how do we get creative? We know that people are consuming video. And to your point, like, can we create video content and then from there streamline a promotion? Or can we create video content and from there create like multiple pieces of written content that then can be shared easier in places that are more check the box? So that's kind of how I look at it as like, okay, let's take this big goal and break it down to things that are actionable, and we can test and we can try new things, but if we're doing X, we might not be doing Y, and we need to be okay with that. We need to like not have FOMO and kind of keep
Yes.
our blinders on and not feel like we're constantly like ambulance chasing or on the coattails of somebody else that might have a much bigger team and a
Mhm.
much bigger budget and like different priorities. We don't really know what's happening. So we have to decide what's right for us and then kind of put our egos aside because even if we love it
It's
as
the best
marketers and
idea
we're
ever.
like, this is so much fun, I love doing this. I know this is like, I'm so brilliant. Um, we have to know when it's time to say, hey, great idea, maybe not the best for what we're
Mhm.
doing right now and like leave it alone. And we have to accept that sometimes things are not going to pan out the way that we expect them to and pivot when the time comes instead of like just continuing to try to make it work. Like you kind of have to make sure that you have this like I always call it a benchmark if you don't have anything else, like if you don't have existing data to rely on, I say, okay, what are we trying to reach? And if we're failing, are we failing forward? Or if we're not making it work at all, we just need to scrap it and do something else. We tried,
Yeah.
great effort. Maybe we'll try again at a different time, but like if we can't control the outcomes and making it positive, then we just need to move on. Because to your point, like there is so
So
much
much.
that we can do,
I love how you talked about
so
the
much
foundation of what you're
all of
building
the
right now,
time.
because I think that's key to any marketing efforts. I literally yesterday was talking to my husband about what we're going to do for MKG in terms of marketing, and he was like, at the end of my thought, he left the room. Like he didn't even say goodbye or anything. He just turned around and left the room, and I was like, "Are you okay?" He's like, "There's too many moving pieces." He just left.
Like, there's so much happening here. I just don't feel like there's room for me in this
I was
room.
like, but that is
You're
marketing.
like,
Like there
but
is there
you are the
it
better part.
does feel like there are a million moving pieces, but when you're building it the way that we're talking about, of the foundation first and then the pieces on top of it, it doesn't feel so daunting. So in terms of foundation for you, what what are you starting with? You know, you've done startups a couple of times. This is your second startup. Where do you, and I'm sure every startup's different and we could do that it depends sort of notion, but in terms of what's working for you right now from a foundational standpoint, what are you starting with? What does your foundation look like from a marketing perspective?
Okay, this element might not be me, but it is so key. Is like, what are we trying to say? What is the consistent message from first first intro to our company all the way through, and like what are the core pieces? Because I feel like anything that you do from there, you one want to make sure that the things that you do execute are still relevant, because if you do something and then the messaging shifts 3 weeks later, you want what you've done to still be something that's relevant, even if you have to update and make it more timely, whatever it is. So what is the message? What do we want to get done? What are the goals and expectations of leadership around what we're doing? So making sure, not necessarily like just taking what their goals are, but making sure that it can be supported by the work that you do. It can be numbers, it can be what their idea of your particular marketing role is. And then I will create an action plan of, hey, here's like a list of the obvious, right? Like content pieces, top of funnel, middle funnel, bottom of funnel, like partners that we can get with, all of the things that you know about or can research. Podcast is a big one now. And then you take kind of those concepts of, okay, what do we have? Is there any content existing? What can we do with it? Can we take that content and manipulate it across channels? And so that way you at least have like
Yes.
grassroots, something running, something going, and then doing like creative iteratives that make that require more time and maybe more stakeholders, and you need co-founders involved and their schedules are a little bit wonky, so you know that it's going to take more review process or whatever it is. So get the stuff out the door, that way you can feel like, oh, okay, checked a box, I got it done, I'm feeling productive. And then go from there of like things that might be a little bit more off the wall or might take more time and might require, more people or contract workers or whatever it is, because you don't have a 2,500 person company where you can be like, hey, yeah, call Sarah. She's totally like game. She just finished a project, whatever. You kind of, you're a one man show for a little bit, and so you have to, and everybody on your team is also
Yes.
doing like a one man band type deal, like even if you have
It's
a
total
teammate
marketing.
like team with you, total, like everybody
Hmm.
is wearing tons of hats, so you have to consider that. Because like my boss will say, she's like, okay, idea's great, let's get it across the line, like
Yes.
let's do some executing. And that takes like that planning. So I say the messaging thing because I've seen it change, and it's just like
Hmm.
deflates a team of, we just did all that work and now
Right.
it's not as relevant. Even if it's still accurate, like it's not as relevant to what we're trying to say now.
Hmm.
So it just
It
kind of,
does. Every time you pivot,
it
oh,
team down.
yes. I have to say that that probably is a crucial moment that, um, if I think about the startups I've worked with, of when we've lost our momentum was when the messaging changed and we had to switch gears. Oh man, there's nothing that feels like you're starting
Yeah.
over more than that. The real conversation we want to have, Kelsey, around having making hard conversations conversational. It sounds like, and we've talked about this, so I'm trying to sound like we haven't already had this conversation. We all know why we've already had this conversation, and I'm just trying to tee it up. But essentially, once in terms of getting to that messaging piece, which I would argue is probably one of the hardest things to do at a company. At MKG, we're still struggling with it 13 years in, and we still have not figured out our positioning. It is the tale as old as time, folks. It's the hardest thing to do of like, why you? Why are you special? Why are you unique? And why should we care? Right? You're just another marketing agency. So,
Yeah.
as a quote unquote cybersecurity company, and I say that with not meaning any single word of it, I have to know like how I imagine the conversations that need to be had internally and externally to get there are there's a certain skill that comes with being able to peel back that onion and go deep to really touch on why your company, why should we be buying from you? And I don't know that we all know how to do that very well. So help us out. How do you get started on having these tough conversations? Like how do you start breaking down those walls? What do you put in place to say to be able to really get to the heart and the root of the issue?
Yeah, Carrie, you're so kind. Like, think so highly of me. I don't know that I have like the secret sauce answer, but I'll tell you
That's what we're
what
here
I've
for.
done and what I've seen to work really well. And also this idea I'm saying like, oh, get your messaging in play as if it's this like easy. Why wouldn't you have thought of
No?
that?
Yeah.
Totally not the case, right? Like it is so complex. And I'm lucky that the team here where I'm currently, they did such a good job with messaging and branding. It's been so nice to step into it. And you listen to so much like as you're taking it in. And that's where I came back to like, oh, I'll just listen. I'll ask questions to people throughout the whole organization. It can be SEs, it can be people on sales, it can be co-founders, tech teams, R&D teams, and I'll ask them a bunch of questions. It might be something like, what are you hearing people say? What was that thing that you presented to a now customer that clicked in their brain to say, yep, that's why? And I think like sometimes there's this divide with marketing, especially in the tech world, because of the stereotypes of both sides. But the reason that I love like the environment that I'm in is everybody's just like, no, go ask, talk to whoever. There's no red tape. Like, put time on whoever's calendar. But just asking the questions and then listening to presentations. I will sometimes, especially when I first start a place, I'll be on a call that I'm not really adding to, but I'll listen to the co-founder or I'll listen to CISOs and I'll take notes about things that they said and then like manipulate them into a marketing way and see if that's going to be part of our messaging. And then as we figure out, like, are things working on social? How do we pull this message into a small clip for a short social video? We'll kind of massage it and take it from there. But it's always going back to that core component that we want people to know about us. And I think like sometimes with marketing, we always want to like evolve and do something different and whatever. I think that there's brilliance in consistency. So once you have that message, even if you're changing topics or you're going from a top of funnel conversation to middle or bottom, you can still like string that along and have that consistency throughout and have that messaging that resonates and just kind of like move it along or change it a little bit based on where the channel is. And I'll tell you, like, for example, for one, some of the feedback came from like a third party meeting. Some of it came from episodes of podcasts before I came, is like the story of our co-founder being a practitioner and him understanding the scars of CISOs, like from personal experience to creation. It's something that I've incorporated in parts of the strategy and multiple messages and like different pieces of content. And I think that it's really important to like listen and hear those elements and then pull them into what you're doing. And it helps like not be distracted by the next shiny thing. It's okay, how do we do a shiny thing, but still stay true to what we need to say and who we need to say it to?
Storytelling is so key. And in a way, what I love about this is it's the giving credibility of the company through the person who created the company and lived where people are. I find that founders sort of lose sight of that they built the thing because they were once the person who had the pain to begin with. And so I love that you're pulling that through. I think that's so key. It sounds like from a lot of what you're doing from a marketing perspective is making things more conversational in general, right? So even by telling this story, it all of a sudden opens up to all these questions I have that I can't answer because we don't have time. So like even just that, you tend to be able to make things so naturally conversational. So and from what we talked about and from the point of this for this podcast is about how we do that, right? So and the importance. So let's talk about why you're feeling like now's the time to make things conversational to begin with.
So I'll talk specifically about our audience, and cybersecurity in general it can be very, very heavy with the information being shared by companies, by marketers, by news sources. Like there are multi-million-dollar breaches, people's lives are changed. There's so many elements of like why we have cybersecurity solutions and the fear mongering and the technicalities of it, like being shared so loosely. This is opinion based, but it was just a lot all of the time. And I was doing some research and I realized that there's at least one company that was created for CISOs because they were so burnt out. And like Gartner did a report that
I
I
went to
think
that
they
report.
expect in 2025, hopefully this has changed, that over 50% of CISOs were going to change roles entirely. Not just like leave the company, they wanted to change roles because they were so overwhelmed with the pressure and like the psychological impact of what's expected of them. So there's that element, right? Like, who are we talking to? Who are the people behind our ICP characteristics, and how are we reaching them? And are they going to be able to hear us as a unique company when there's so much noise? They're so heavily marketed. I was on a call with somebody who was a CISO and he kept nicely saying, I feel so special to marketers because like we just put so much information in front of them all of the time. So that was one element. And then the other element was, well, how are people consuming this? Right? Like, how do we take these very technical concepts, these very important solutions, and make it in a way that they can hear us with how we're saying it, how we're reaching them, what format we're reaching them in, and then know, yes, they'll get the data. Yes, they'll get the severity of this problem and this challenge. And they kind of need to know that they're not alone and that we can have a conversation about it. And it's not as daunting as this like black hole of 90% of companies are being breached and all of this and like all of the things. And on the flip side there might be this promise of like be 100% secure,
It's
never
not
get a breach,
realistic.
and that is not something that anybody can promise, right? Like you have to find this ground of, do we need to fearmonger them, and is that effective? And can we just be realistic about what we're offering that can be backed up by the solution, and speak to them in a way that makes them feel like, okay, yeah, I get that. I can talk to that person. I can have a conversation with that person. And being in room with CISOs and being at events and talking with them, like, I know I can have a conversation with them directly. So now I guess I'm just going to do that behind a camera on video. And we're going to extend that to other video
Yes, way.
elements, like street interviews and all of like these fun things that kind of create this juxtaposition in a very serious industry, and very like, like very serious, very technical, very, driven type A personalities, to make it more conversational and make it and kind of like get them to be more open to what we're trying to educate them about. Because it's all education and information that we're sharing, and the decision that's made is influenced by that, but ultimately it's
Right.
their decision. And they have to be ones like comfortable making it one way or the other.
I think it's helpful to make it conversational too because we don't have to assume that we know where they are, right? And then hopefully make the, it's just what we were talking about earlier of like, how do we not do so much? Well, you can not do so much by actually understanding in the moment what people need. And so you just have the thing for that one moment versus trying to anticipate what everything will eventually be someday. So let's have it on hand and create the thing. So I really love when it's
Yeah.
conversational, it gives you the opportunity to create it on the fly versus having to have it ready to rip forward, ready to go.
Yeah. And to just do it. Like we talk about, okay, well, we don't want to assume where they are, but we also can't assume that they wouldn't be interested in a marketer being behind the camera and having education like around this space in a very conversational way, because I know my role, right? I know that we are not going to have an in-depth technical like banter. We're not going to talk about what I've coded because I haven't, like, since maybe MySpace days. Will date me again. Um, but we also can't assume that they don't want that type of content and that type of channel. And so we get to say, why not? If it if like I always say, I'm not afraid to be wrong. So why not just assume that I'm right and prove otherwise? Assume that this will
Until it
work
goes, it
until we
doesn't.
know otherwise. Yeah. And like if the worst thing out of it comes from having a microphone and a tripod, eh, we're doing okay.
In terms of, I love what you said about, it's all well and good to talk about making things conversational and doing that. It's easy to say that from a sales perspective because that's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to have these one-on-one personalized conversations on a regular basis. That's part of their job. As marketers, it's not seen as part of our job
Yeah.
necessarily, unless you do things like podcasting, like we're doing today. But uh, you talked about it, you sort of glossed over it. So I want to circle back on it and make it tangible for people. But you keep calling them street interviews. Paint us a picture here, Kelsey, and you can see
Yes.
it in your beautiful brain. So pull it out for us in words of
I
what
can.
street interviewing will look like and mean. And then how are you going to create that content? And then what are you going to do with it?
Yes. So this came from a conversation with my boss. So I started this company in October and just kind of hit the ground running. I'm so sad that I don't have the examples because I was rained out in Boston when I was going to do it. And, but we will have examples soon. It's in the works. So, street interviews, think like everybody on, well, not everybody, but a lot of people on TikTok are doing these interviews. Let me talk to a stranger. Let me ask them about something. Well, I'm going to try to tailor my audience a little bit more to be more in the cyberspace, or assuming that they're in the cyberspace, and talk to them about what do NHIs mean? Like, what do you think the NHI acronym stands for? How do you see the cybersecurity evolving from your point of view? Because again, it's very different, right? Like on TikTok, there are deep fakes already. And that's just the norm for them. Whereas when I joined TikTok, I was like, first of all, I'm too old for this, but I'm not. And second of all, the the nature of it took a learning curve for me. And so these people who are in college or who are who are studying the in cybersecurity, they're getting to learn about it in real time, whereas like I'm going back and educating myself. So we're just going to have a chat on the street about what NHIs are. What do you like think or know about the challenge at hand? How do you see them evolving with the current state, right? Because like developers aren't going anywhere and hackers aren't going anywhere. And those are two critical components of the non-human identity issue, which is what my company does. So I'm using it as my example. So where do we see it going from here, and making it like cool, hip? I already have the jeans
I
picked
love
out
it.
that I'm wearing because I've had multiple teenage girls, multiple, compliment me. Like as I'm putting my baby in the car, my 17-month-old, they're like, "I love your jeans." I'm like, "Oh, okay, mental
Rude.
note. I am
Are
so
they
wearing these."
preppy? Are they so preppy? Um,
They are so baggy. They're called like
oh,
elephant leg jeans. They're so baggy and like comfy for me because I don't know, I wish like baggy jeans and t-shirts and tennis shoes were in when I was in college and high school, because that it's just so comfy. So now I get to go like outside of college campuses, in cities, and pose. I'm going to be a poser like I'm young, hip, and cool. Um, I think I'm
I
hip and
totally think you're
cool,
hip and
but
cool.
we'll
So are
see.
you going to a specific conference to do this? Because you said you're gonna zone in on on CISOs in the cybersecurity crowd, but you have to know that they're a cybersecurity crowd because you're talking about very technical things. So I'm assuming you're going to some sort of conference where all these people will be hanging out naturally.
It will happen at conferences because I will be there. So if anybody watching sees me
I love
and you
it.
want to chat, let's do it.
On the sidewalk.
Very fun.
Let's go.
Yes, I'm with it. But I'm also going to be targeting some
Oh,
college campuses.
interesting.
So yeah, yeah. So I have like a few different. I'm very big on like, let's not recreate the wheel. Let's just hop on the wheel that's already turning. So I have a few different things planned around college campuses this year. And I think that that's like one, I feel like a little bit more open to that, these newer concepts. They're very comfortable like in front of the camera. It's a great way for us who are maybe trying something new to try it in a way where you're like, I don't care what this 20-year-old thinks about
Let's
me, but
see what
let's have
happens.
fun together and like let's get this content. And what you can do with it, and being like part of our brand and relevant to who we are and what we're doing. How do you kind of spin that? I think a lot of it is like, you just have to try. You just have to do it.
I love
And
that.
yeah, if you're there or if you can make it work, like just why not try it?
I I have more questions, but I'm going to pause because our audience is more important than I am, and they have some really good questions. So let's dive in here. Beth asked, Kelsey, what is the time frame you use to test something to see if it works or not? Does it depend on what type of marketing channel?
Totally can depend on the type of marketing channel and where you're going, but I don't want to say that because that's not like super helpful. I think that if you have a specific channel and you're trying to test something, get an idea of the benchmark of how long before it can take results, because there are so many factors, right? It can depend on your budget. It can depend on how big your audience is. It can depend on how many ads or how many things you have running. And then on the flip side, if you're testing this whole new concept, like I am with video, that can take much longer. If what you're able to measure or not able to measure, it can take much longer. So if I'm testing something and I get to set those parameters, I will do a couple of things. I will set expectations and make sure that they're understood by leadership and who is measuring my success on the program. And like, we have to prioritize what we're doing, and I don't want them to deprioritize something because we didn't leave enough time in order to determine whether or not the test was successful. And so I'll kind of determine that and get them on board. The other piece of advice that I will have is when you're launching a new test, especially if there's paid money around it, it can kind of feel like hitting the big red button and being like, oh my gosh, I'm spending money. I have to answer for it. Like, this is really stressful and blah, blah, blah. So for the first week, and I break this down, like first 24 to 48 hours, you make sure everything's running properly. You're not like blowing through budget. Your parameters are set. And if you have less budget, err on the side of caution, because I would much rather a test take longer than blow through money and have to answer for thousands of dollars that you're like, yeah, probably shouldn't have had the audience
Mm-hmm.
that big or something along those lines. Um, and then for the first 2 weeks, your program might be ramping up. I'm using this as an example for like if you're doing a test on LinkedIn or something like that. And the month mark is where I say we might be able to see it leaning one way or the other. So monitoring on a monthly basis as, tests and campaigns get a little bit more traction. But my reporting for some of the tests are quarterly goals, only because there's so much fluctuation that can happen. And when you're doing tests, Beth, like control your controllables. What can you control in the matter? And then what do you have to consider that could be something that like you didn't anticipate, budget changes, audience, etc., especially if you've never done it before, it's the first time. So time frame does depend, but if you find your kind of baseline that you want to reference, and then manipulate it so it works for you and works for your team and your budget and your audience size. If you're really nervous about testing something, you can always expand. It's a little bit harder to dial back. So I sometimes will start more conservatively with like audience size or ads or whatever, and then expand from there. I feel more comfortable with budgets, and that doesn't matter if if I've had a company who's spending $50,000 a month or $5,000 a month. Like the value of the dollar is still there. So you can always start conservative if you're nervous about tests or kind of the leadership is like iffy about what you're doing, and then expand from there.
I totally agree, especially when it comes to ads. Google hates when you change too much too fast. So dialing up budgets left, right, and center
Yes.
will freak it out and you will get nowhere. So I love what you're saying, Kelsey, and completely agree of like putting a little bit in, getting it dialed in, and then building upon it. I do want to say too that the idea of a testing schedule is really tricky because you don't know what you don't know. And so I love what you're, again, just sort of doubling down on the aspect of iteration. So don't just pull something
Yeah.
because you gave it 3 months doing it the same way and decided it didn't work, right? Look, set some clear
Right.
KPIs, and get after it and make changes on a regular basis to really see, give it a good run of if you've tried everything and it still isn't working, then okay, but like turning something on, giving it 3 months, not changing a thing, and then deciding it's not working is not necessarily the problem. So definitely dig into the diagnosis of that.
And it's not like a true test. So I think a lot of times we want things, and especially in the tech world, when you're dealing, and Kerry, you've heard me say this, we want like a black and white picture. We want like, yes, no, this worked, this didn't work. And we know in marketing that marketing is like a million shades of gray. So we have to find that in between where we say, hey, these are our KPIs, these are our assumptions, this is the hypothesis, this is the goal. And we outline those things. And then we have the gray parts where it's, and this is everything that we're testing. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I totally love it.
that's,
I could talk about this all. This could be in
that's
a
my,
podcast in and of itself because
I
I,
know we have
yeah,
to have
I mean,
like
I also believe in. Oh, all right, I'm going to pause because Juan Pablo Garcia asked so many great questions, and we're only going to get to one of them. I'm so sorry, Juan, but we will circle back with you. How do you deal with the momentum of big established companies have in marketing, communications, and cybersecurity, and the risk averse ICP you work with? Yeah.
yes. That's a big question, one, and I don't know if I have the full answer. I can tell you what I do, and it's really hard because we don't know what's going on. Like Wizard of Oz, we don't know what's happening behind the scenes. And in this case, like I'm in a startup. We are cost efficient in what we do. And I don't have a Coca Cola budget. So I have to keep my blinders on and say, like, yes, okay, that's what they're doing. That's what they're saying. We have to be cognizant of that, right? Like, we have to be in tune with what big companies and competitors are doing. And I'll use my last startup as an example. So, and this is a good example. We have to be in tune with what they're doing, and we have to get back to that focused aspect that we talked about, which is, what are our goals? What is our messaging? What is the best way to disperse and reach our goals? And that might be more like budget friendly than a person with a 7+ figure budget for just marketing. Um, so I'm going to give a perfect example one, and this comes from my previous company. It was a DSPM startup. It was since acquired by a major corporation. So we started bidding on Google keywords, and I've worked with wonderful people who were part of the organization. They were extension of us on an agency when I came in. We started bidding on data security posture management, DSPM keywords when the search volume was like nothing. It
Yeah.
was like 50 maybe search queries per month. But we bid on them for months and we stayed true. They weren't getting like a ton of results. We kind of had to answer to that and we just had to stay consistent, stay consistent. And then that was in like June. I see a little lovey hand. That was in June 2022, May, June. And then in November, Big ID and Wiz, who
Mm-hmm.
are
Yep.
huge and have astronomical budgets compared to what we were working with, and like power, right? Like there's power in their domain. There's so many things that like Google considers. Um, they announced that they were adding DSPM solutions to their stack. And so with that big announcement, our search queries grew a little bit like month over month. Search queries went to like 1,000, 2,500, 3,500. But we own the search impression share of it because we stayed true to what our goals were, what our visions were, what we wanted to control. Even if that didn't happen in the time frame that it did, we knew that that was a direct connection and that was what we needed people searching for in order for our ads. So our search impression share was like between 80 and
Wow.
90% ownership of those key terms. And it went from 50 search volumes a month to 3,500 and plus.
Yeah.
So we benefited from those huge companies. And a lot of times that'll happen, but like it's hard to
Mm-hmm.
not compare yourself and to not say, okay, well, they're going to beat us out because they have the budget. That can be the case sometimes, but it doesn't have to be an or statement. It can be an and. Like they can beat us out with budget and we can still win where it matters. And as far as like the risk adverse ICP, oh, it's hard. Like it's hard marketing to security people. It's even harder marketing to people who aren't very clear in like what their titles are, especially if you're in a brand new market where you have an ICP, but not really, because depending on the organization, the team can look differently. They can be called something different, etc. And so that's where I say, okay, that's where you need that balance of brand awareness and paid targeting because the brand awareness, if you're saying the right thing, it will reach the right people. It takes more time and you have to understand that, but you can't accomplish anything with one or the other. Like it has to be both the effort and the money, and finding that balance. And the risk adverse ICP will come eventually when they have the problem, when they have the pain, when they've heard it from the right person, and say, like, hey, we really need to pay attention to this. And if you've positioned yourself as the source of truth and trust, then you're kind of like one, you're already one leg above. And I
We're
know
totally over
we're
time,
close
but
to
oh
time,
my
but I hope that
gosh.
that helped.
Brand, y'all, it's like it is long overdue. We should have been paying attention to brands so much sooner than we have been. But brand is going to be the key. The consistency part, the showing up consistently with your brand, with your messaging, with those keywords that aren't quite there yet, but will be. I mean, all roads are going to lead. I've been following Rand Fishkin forever, but recently he has been on this like drum of brand because uh, it's going to be the thing that breaks through by showing up consistently, saying consistent things to your audience, and then them researching around the problems they're having and you showing up. That recognition is going to pay tenfold in the long run. So, yes to all of that. Oh my gosh, I want to unpack all of the things and we can't. I know. You're just gonna come back. This is gonna be great. You're just gonna come back and we're gonna hang out and we're gonna have
Yes.
and Juan is going
Zoom
to
for
chime back
two.
on in with all these amazing questions along with Beth. We hope to see you next time. Thank you both so much for chiming in. I thank you, Kelsey
Yes.
Purcell. Where
Thank
can
you.
people find you? They want to know more. Where should they go?
Oh, just come stalk my LinkedIn, get in touch with me. And truly, part of marketing, like, be a soundboard with each other and feel free to do that with me on LinkedIn. Don't like send me a really weird salesy message, but if you're just like, hey, I saw you on this podcast, and that way I connect with you and I know to like to respond to your message, and then just soundboard with me. I'm totally open to that. And I feel like that's where we get better as marketers, especially like, hey, I might not be an expert, but what do you think about this idea? Totally open for that. I love it. I do it a lot with a lot of people that I know in the industry of various roles. You
Love it.
like, you just, I think like we band together. Find me on LinkedIn. I think my LinkedIn, you tagged it. It's like slash Purcell Kelsey. So I'm staying really elusive, but we'll stick with the
There it
Kelsey
is.
Purcell.
There
There
it
it is.
is.
Thanks,
Before we
Elijah.
go, Kelsey, you're clearly more than a marketer, even though you've been doing it forever. What's one thing for 2025 that you are most looking forward to personally to bring you joy? Or maybe there's something already happening right now that's bringing you joy, but we need more joy in our life.
Okay, I'll do one quickly. I'll do one like work related and one not. So I've been doing walk and works where I go on like a 1 hour walk, 30 minutes out and back. Maybe not even like 45. And I do a like brainstorm, outline, answer emails if I'm feeling like really froggy. But I feel like that's really refreshing and really nice. Sometimes you just need to go touch grass, and
Fresh
that brings
air.
me joy because I get to see animals and all the things. Yeah. And then the other part is I live at the beach, and I have had all of the things happening the last few years with two kids. So I really want to get back into surfing and like prioritizing time in the water with me and my kids. My husband's a phenomenal surfer, so that's really important to me, is like finding that balance, which can be
Mhm.
hard, especially if you work from home, but so necessary. And that brings me joy, like going to see where I live and enjoying it.
Oh my
Just
gosh.
love it.
I want to say some. So Guernsey, they swim all year round in the freezing cold water because apparently it is so good. It's on my bucket list. Before I leave Guernsey, I will go swim in like the dead of winter because apparently it's like amazing for your mental health. There is something powerful about the water, and I am so here for that. So I'm gonna keep asking you, Kelsey, if you've been out swimming. We're gonna make it happen. Uh,
We
we
should.
only scratched the surface of the conversation that we so wanted to have. We ran out of time, and there was just too many good questions to leave them open ended. So thank you for your time. I will have you back. As you're just gonna have to come back on. Please
Okay,
do.
I'm holding you to it. Like, I love this, and we can just have podcasts and tea time
Yes.
and coffee, and Juan and
Yeah.
Juan and
Absolutely.
Beth can
All day.
join us. I was reading Elijah and then seeing Beth,
Merge.
and my brain was combining the two. Elijah, Beth, no, both
All
of
of the
you will
above.
be there.
We look forward to seeing you next time. All of the above.
All
Well,
of them.
stay tuned for Kelsey in part two. We will get that program for you all, I promise. I'm so grateful. So grateful. Thank you all for listening. If you like this episode, please like, subscribe, and share. This episode is brought to you by MKG Marketing, the digital marketing agency that helps cybersecurity and complex brands get found via SEO and digital ads. It's hosted by me, Kerry Gard, CEO and co-founder of MKG Marketing. And if you'd like to be a guest, DM me. Oh man, love to have y'all on. Thank you all so much. Thank you to Elijah, my podcast sidekick, and we'll see you next time.